climate change, you can't afford to be a moderate anymore. You can't afford to be a centrist, right? Because the changes that are required are so massive, so radical, it's never been done before during peacetime. What we need to change about the current economic system. A bit of tinkering around the edges just won't do it. And that's not about being either right-wing or a leftist, it's about being a realist. The timeline is being set by science. We need to do it now. And then when we talk about the most pressing issue of today in this country, Brexit, we know that there are all these right-wing think tanks who have their own plan, right? They basically want to make this country into a paradise for billionaires. What we need to do is come up with an alternative vision right now, not just be against things that you don't like, but have a vision of how Brexit could actually be a positive thing, how we could transform this country in one of the best places on earth.
And our thanks to God's Own Junkyard in Walthamstow. Walthamstow. Welcome, Rutger. I'm glad. Hope you enjoyed your trip there.
Great to be here.
So, Alan, your kind of centrism is now passé.
Yeah, I don't understand the bit about moderation because moderation isn't picking some stodgy idea from the middle. Moderation is about listening to other points of view and proceeding through a democratic basis. I mean, Beveridge was a moderate. He transformed this country through the welfare state. Butler was a moderate. The Education Act transformed our society. So I don't think it's about being militant or moderate. And actually, I thought one of the issues about the European Union, about us, which Michael probably agreed with, you know, we can set our own agenda and all that. One of the problems you referred to was climate change. And it's one of those issues where no country can deal with it on their own, where international cooperation is absolutely essential. So leaving the European Union doesn't advance that 1 inch. So I think you're right about, I mean, your idea about universal income isn't new. It was published in 1503 in a book called Utopia.
Oh, you don't have to tell me.
And it's not worked very well in Finland at the moment, but it's an idea worth exploring. It's great to have these ideas, but you can't just say on the left, it's great young people having new ideas and suggest that it's just kind of on the left, because on the left, actually, all I see mainly is old ideas being recycled.
Rutger?
Well, it's true that some of these ideas are old, right? Think about much higher top marginal tax rates for the very rich, which are favored by the vast majority of people in this country and elsewhere for decades, are now, I mean, I think that 5-10 years ago, it would have, you know, people would have dismissed the idea of talking about higher taxes, and now it's become much more popular.
Because of the banking crisis.
Yeah, obviously.
Michael, what's your reaction?
I didn't know that basic income had been discussed since the 16th century, but it's certainly been discussed all the time that I've been in politics, which is quite a long
Milton
time.
Friedman floated the idea
Which
in the
is
1960s.
quite a long time, and it's not got anywhere in that time. Climate change, for a lot of people who are worried about climate change, but there's absolutely no sign in any of the developed economies that they're interested in taking radical measures. And as far as the attack at the end on the right wing who want a paradise for billionaires, I thought that was complete phooey. I mean, actually, the people on the right wing have been talking rather idealistically about abolishing tariffs and trading freely with the world. So I thought it was a pretty ill-informed film, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, where to begin?
At the beginning.
Yeah. I think that what's really exciting about this moment, right, is that we're suddenly discussing ideas once again that just not very long ago were being dismissed as unreasonable, unrealistic, etc. So you see many things happening at the same time. The Greta Thunberg phenomenon, you know, kids around the globe going on strike and not going to school. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you know, the great congresswoman in the US, suddenly talking about new ideas, really with a bold forward vision. Basically, I mean, your generation did nothing about climate change, or almost nothing, and now there's a young generation that realizes that we need to actually start doing something, come up with something like a Green New Deal, and just in a couple of decades, like 10, 20 years, move towards a zero emissions economy, right? So that's what I mean by just tinkering around the edges just won't do it.
But is it really a new idea or a good idea to return to marginal rates of tax of 90% or so on that almost nobody ever paid?
Well, that was the point. It was the point that you had a maximum salary, right? So in the 50s and the 60s, both in the US and in the UK, you had top marginal tax rates of like 80, 90%.
98.
In the golden age of capitalism, by the way, with the highest growth rates and the most innovation.
It was a post-war boom.
Sure, but it worked fine with high taxes. And then the interesting thing is that
why
actually
did
the
it
point
work?
was
Why
that
did it
not
work
many people
fine?
paid it because it worked as a maximum
But
salary.
what's the
right?
point of a tax rate that not many people pay?
Well, it works as a maximum salary. It just becomes pointless to give people a higher salary if they have to give 90% to the taxman, right?
But they never did give 90% to the taxman.
Exactly.
The effective rate for those in the top tax bracket in America was under 40%.
Sure, but then
So
you still have
what's
to
the
agree
point?
that even average tax rates were much higher back then. And I mean, there's a clear causal factor between inequality spiraling out of control and tax rates around the globe going down, down, down.
But
For the
even
rich.
when these tax rates were that high, though nobody paid them, the amount taken in income tax paid by the rich was lower than the amount they pay now.
Yeah, and that's an old trick. You know, that's basically because we live in such an incredibly unequal countries, especially in the US. And that's sure, then relatively they pay more in tax than the poor. But the poor just haven't much to give here. But you must agree, right, that inequality has gone through the roof.
No,
that must have
don't
had
agree.
something.
Michael?
Well, no, that's simply not true. Inequality in this country is less than it has been.
Well, actually,
more
since the
people are
Thatcher
in work
years,
than ever before.
No, it's
Unemployment
absolutely
is
not
lower
true.
than it
Well,
ever
this
has
is just
been.
completely fact-free. Since the Thatcher years, inequality has grown a lot. If you look at, like, say, the Gini index, sure, there hasn't been much of a change in the past 20 years. But if you look at top shares,
there's been an
like
improvement.
the rigorous best
There's been an
economic
improvement in inequality.
research from best
And then
economics.
if you go globally, of course, I mean, there's been the emergence of, an immense middle class in China, an immense middle class in India. There's much more equality globally than there ever was before. And that's been achieved by policies that have been friendly towards enterprise.
by China.
Well, no, I mean, the policies that you advocate have been tested in places like Venezuela, and look at the absolute rubbish that has come out of it.
That just doesn't work with my generation anymore, you know?
Well, it doesn't matter whether it works, it matters whether it's true or
Wait a
not.
minute, I was born in 1988, so that's a year
You
before the
keep
fall
going
of
on
the
about how
Berlin Wall.
young you are, but that's not an excuse for
No, but
ignorance.
this
What has
whole
happened in
trick, it doesn't
Venezuela is the
work
country
anymore.
has been destroyed. The poor have been destroyed. Millions of people have left the country.
Yeah.
Watch the television or watch your screen.
right.
Look at your mobile phone.
Okay, nobody
I'm
gets
not
the point.
talking about communism, I'm talking about common sense, right?
No, you're talking about
So
communism.
we had all these policies, like much higher tax rates in capitalist economies, right? In the golden age of capitalism. Universal basic income is actually, in many ways, you could see it as a right-wing idea. It's about giving people some venture capital to move to a different job, start a new company, invest in their lives. I think it would be the crowning achievement of capitalism, actually. So this is just so boring, this debate
there
about
are still-
capitalism
there are
versus
still
socialism.
inequalities.
We
There's
don't
huge-
live in the 70s anymore, right?
Yeah,
Get on with it.
Well, that's entirely my point. We don't live in the 70s anymore. What you're advocating was tried in the
I think
70s,
it's
failed
just
in the
an old
70s.
Let me hear from
It's-
Alan.
There's huge health inequalities for a start, which we can now measure and need to be overcome. The problem is, you mentioned that school kids demonstration the other Friday. I saw the banners, socialist worker banners, change the system, not the climate. So in a sense, it goes right back to Attlee, who was also a moderate, who said that the argument is not between left and right. This was in the 1930s. It's between democratic and totalitarian forms of government. And that's still the case, because most of these ideas being put forward are being put forward as part of a plan that this system's rubbish, parliamentary democracy is bourgeois democracy. God, I've been listening to that since the 1950s. It's nothing new, and it's just as wrong now as it's always been.
Well, you must agree with me, right, that when we talk about a huge challenge like climate change, that not much has been done in the past couple of decades.
That's an enormous amount has been
by
done. We were
so-called
the first
moderates
government
and
to
centrists.
sign up. Labour government, Ed Miliband was the Environment Secretary.
CO2 emissions have collapsed.
To zero, carbon
The coal
trading.
industry has been abolished in this country.
Carbon trading was an enormous step forward.
if you want to demonstrate against climate change, it shouldn't be in Parliament Square. It should be outside the Chinese embassy. They're opening a new coal-fired station every week.
I think that's also
we've
trick
closed.
doesn't work anymore either.
We've
What do you mean? It's not a trick.
It's a
It
fact.
is. Yeah.
We've closed every coal-fired
Every
station
fact is a trick.
in this country.
No.
It has either been closed or is about to be closed. China is building a station every week of the dirtiest, most polluting kind of energy generation.
Sure.
So go to
Just
the
as
Chinese.
we have been doing, you know,
go
when
to the
we were
Chinese
developing, right? So
Yeah,
that's
but
a
we've
natural
stopped.
development cycle, I think.
Yeah, but nobody knew about the CO2 threat in these
I think
days.
it's a
Okay, so
China
responsibility.
does
So you're
now.
going to
The
allow
richest-
natural development cycles, are you?
Well, no, I'm just talking about
so there's no radical change there, is there?
Of the richest countries
So
on
what you're
Earth
saying is China
to
can
be the
build lots and
first
lots
in
of
moving
coal
towards
stations because
much
it's a
more
natural development
sustainable
cycle.
economy, right?
Thank God you haven't called for a second referendum. The first person
No,
to sit on that sofa for
but-
several weeks who hasn't.
Well, give them time. You can
Yeah,
come
he's getting there, isn't he?
to that.
I think Rutger's probably in favour of us leaving the European Union.
Oh yeah,
Are you?
You've been such
Yeah,
a
of
pain in the
course.
ass for
Yeah,
such a long time. I think we can now finally build a proper union. You know?
There you go, he's on your side. He's on your
Well,
side.
we've got a point of agreement. That's good.
Yeah. Even though I do think that it is quite depressing, this whole Brexit business, right? But now I think that especially people on the left or progressive need to come up with some kind of positive vision how it could actually be a good thing, right? And that it won't be this paradise for billionaires.
But I think your formula for a successful post-Brexit Britain would be 90% marginal rates on income tax, a large wealth tax, and a bigger inheritance tax. Will that really have the best and the brightest coming to our shores?
Well, I think so, yeah. I
Really?
think so. What the issue is now is that there are so many people at the so-called at the top of the economy, right? The so-called wealth creators. But if you actually look at what they're doing, they're not really creating wealth, right? We're talking about corporate lawyers, bankers, consultants, and you give them a beer or maybe two, and at the end of the day, they'll admit that their job is absolutely meaningless and they don't add anything of value.
So-
if they go on strike, no one cares, right? Nothing much happened.
That's
In
a
my
bit like-
book, I've got one example of bankers going on strike. It's the only
Well, it was way back
strike
in
that ever happened
1970.
in 1970 in Ireland.
You wouldn't
indeed.
want the ATMs to go on strike now.
Well, the strike lasted for 6 months, and nothing much happened. Right?
Let me ask you a
So
final
that's the real
question.
question I think we should ask.
Because
Is who are the real wealth
It's
creators?
interesting, to see. We can hardly say we're not needing some new ideas, or even recycling old ideas to try again. But if these ideas are on the march now, who other than the sort of left of the Democrats in America is adopting them?
Well, it's happening around the globe, isn't it?
Give me a party.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, parties are always at the end, right? It always starts at the fringes with people who are first dismissed as crazy, ridiculous, irrelevant. Just 5 years ago, when I was giving my first talks about basic income, and I know it's an old idea, but it was also quite forgotten, right?
No, it was never.
And I was given talks for small groups of anarchists, right, with long hair, a bit smelly. Now it's being discussed around the globe. I was invited to Davos, of all places, to talk about it. So people
What had you
didn't
done
expect
to
that.
deserve that?
Well, write a book about it. And there are many people who are worried about the threat of automation, right? Robots taking our jobs. And here again, basic income seems a sensible idea.
Just want to remind you that employment has never been higher in this country. Unemployment's never been
And
lower.
I just need to remind you all that we've run out of time. But Rutger Bregman, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now it's late. Jezza and Chuka bromance late. Yes, once Labour brothers in arms, well, kind of. Jezza the Red can now no longer bear even to be in the same room as Chuka the Smooth. Invited to a meeting of party leaders to discuss ways forward out of the Brexit